Hello, hi everyone. So thanks for joining us today in this session. We're gonna go through some concepts and explain some of the features of our safe browser, uh, the browser that is needed to connect to the safe network. I'm gonna briefly go through some of it before then jumping into other details that Josh is gonna also be doing to show the APIs, data types, and also our Pattern and some of the features that we developed with our Pattern application, like like a Twitter-like app, social app on the Safe network. And finally, we're gonna have this Q&A session that we can answer questions that you have and try to help any developers out there with this type of questions, especially if you are trying to create applications or maybe just trying to understand more about the Safe browser. So the first thing is if you go to get our latest Safe browser, you can always go to our Safe browser repo or MaidSafe in GitHub. If you go to releases, you will always find the latest version published here for you to download for your own platform, Linux, OS X, or Windows. And after downloading, just install it and run it like any other application, any other desktop application. This is the latest version that I'm running here of the Safe browser, which is for our Alpha 2 test network. It's the current live test network that we have, which has been running for 1.5 years. So the Safe browser is the main entry point at the moment, at least, to the Safe network, and it just allows users to browse websites or web applications exactly in the same way as any other browser does on the current internet. Even that the Safe network is an autonomous and decentralized network, the Safe browser abstracts the user from all of that, and the experience is just the same. Basically, the same way as you typing some domain name or human readable URLs on the ClearNet, this is the same way to do it on the Safe network. This website published by someone from the community, or this other one about someone who published a website which shows the best or the most beautiful cat on the Safe network. So as you see, this is fetching the website and the content of the website from the Safe network by just entering this human readable URL. The Safe browser also allows to browse and fetch content using the actual address of the content. We're going to talk about that a bit later and show some examples of it, how that can be used, how that relates to linked data and so on. We call them stored URLs at the moment, which is part of the content addressable system that the Safe network supports, or maybe it can be considered as content addressable system as well. And now, one of the main aspects of the Safe network is users are always the owners of the data that they generate or store on the network. That means that applications that are used by the user are granted only permissions to read and write data on behalf of the user. This is when the authenticator comes into play. So the authenticator is the moment it's embedded in the browser. We're having some ideas of having some authenticator like a standalone application or in other ways, but at the moment it's all integrated in the Safe browser, so you don't need to download any other application. And from this page, you can not only create your account, but also log in with your credentials, access to your account, and also manage all the applications that you were authorizing to read and write data on behalf of your account. Josh is going to talk about it and show a bit more about this. We're also going to see it in action when we show Puppet. So, and that's for now about the authenticator. Lastly, well, not lastly actually. One of the other main or important things about the browser is the API it exposes. So the browser already exposes the Safe or web API. So if you are creating a web application that needs to read or write data on the Safe network, you don't have to add any other dependency or library. The API is already exposed by the browser in the DOM. So we are Josh also gonna explain a bit more about the API, the documentation we have for the API, and also the data types that are currently supported by the Safe network. But just to show you this, this is what we call our playground tool, which is just a web application currently published on our Alpha 2 test network, if you want to make use of it, which allows developers to play with the API and learn how to use it from here. So there is no need to create the web app and upload it and to be able to test and learn about the API. So here you can see it has snippet codes for different type of operations that you can do with the API. But I'm gonna leave it. Josh is gonna show just a few steps by using this playground tool, so you have an idea of how it is used. It's very useful for developers, especially when you are learning about the API. So very recommended. And so the last thing, or the last main feature that I'm going to talk about now before going into some of the details, is the browser that you see here is the one that connects to our Alpha 2 test network. But for developers, we have another flavor of our Safe browser, which is what we call the browser for the mock network. So it's just, it has all the same features. There is nothing different from that aspect. The only difference is it connects to a local temporary file, and that file is treated as if it was the Safe network. So you can see here, this one shows a red label, which means that you are not connected to any live network or any live test network, but just to a mock network, which is a local file in your computer. So this version of the browser, this flavor of the browser is very useful for developers, because the APIs, the features, everything is just the same, and it's transparent to the application. So application can be tested here with the APIs, and then after they are finalized, they are ready to be deployed on any of the live networks. So this is the way that developers usually start when creating any application, not just a web application, but also a desktop application on for the Safe network, because for a desktop application, you would also need the authenticator to authorize the application to access the network, and so you would also need the browser for the mock in such a case, right? So those are the main aspects at the high level. We're gonna see some of the details now. So maybe Josh, you can now jump into and talk about the authenticator and some of the data types.
I'll continue, yes. Let me just share my screen. Okay. So, as Gab was just saying, you can log into the network and you're in control of your data, which is all quite cool and fancy, which means that everything that you do on the network, you're in control of. You can have a list of all the applications, and you can see what things those applications can do on the network. They can access, they can insert, read, update, all of that sort of stuff, all of which is key to giving users back control of their data. The data that you can write to the network falls into two types of data at the moment. So where's that link? There it is. Sorry. So we have immutable data, as we call it, which is basically binary blobs of data. So your HTML that you upload, any files, images that you upload to the network are all stored as immutable data. It's immutable because it can't be changed. It's essentially stored at a hash of the location. So as well as being able to do the PNS, the public name system stuff that Gabriel was talking about earlier, you could also access the same image at the source URL for it, for example. So this is pointing to a specific piece of data, which I need to turn the experiments on. We'll go more into this later as to what that's actually talking about, but that would, say, be the link to an image or something. The other thing is a link to this HTML page that we have is mutable data. Mutable data on the Safe network is data that you can update and change. It's effectively like a key value store. Let me just go to the Dev Hub to show you this. So we've gone over the authenticator and user rights. This, so yeah. This is all on hub.safedev.org, but basically mutable data being a key value store, you can sort of use it as a really simplistic database where you can put keys, you can retrieve them. You can do this for applications. So your application will have its own container, which any instance of your app that opens in any web page, you can go and fetch things from that container, and you could grab info for that the user has saved, whatever your application wants to do, basically. And you can update that information. So one day the username is this, the next day they want to update that, they can do that and change it in the mutable data. And so you can sort of grab these different versions of more flexible data for using and building web apps with. So for reading more about all of this stuff, we have a variety of documentations available. We've got docs for the APIs themselves, which is the generated docs from the JavaScript, which you can see here at docs.maidsafe.net. This goes over every facet of the Safe API. It's the detailed documentation. We have the playground, which Gab was showing earlier. Playground, which is sort of an interactive exploration of the APIs, basically. You can run this code, you can see sample code. So to start a new app, you create your app info, you have a callback for when the network state changes if there's a disconnect event or some such. Any other options that you might want to have, and then you can run the code to initialize the app. And this can all be executed in the browser, and you can actually access this information in the browser console if it is saved to app. So you can see we've got this app variable, which is actually a Safe app. And as we run through this, we get some simple instructions about what to do next. So this is kind of like a nice way to see the various steps that you might need to do to run an application. So classify to safe authorize, okay. And you can see that we get a pop-up about the thing. So do we want to accept this as a user? Yeah, sure. And then the last step, auth, login from URI, which gives us, hopefully, an app that's connected to the network and authenticated. So here you have all bits of the API as well, but somewhat less detailed, but with code samples, and you can play around and see what's going on there. And in general, as I touched on before, we've got the Dev Hub where you can find all sorts of documentation and examples. So from here, there's examples for all the programming language that we have. If you go to start developing, you can see sample applications. You can choose a language if you want to do it in Node.js for the web using Android, this sort of stuff. So there's examples to get you going with making apps for the network there. And then the last thing to show you right now is for a more general overview of the Safe Network, we have Safenetwork.tech, which is, it's the website for the network. So this is something that causes confusion frequently and somewhat understandably. The Safe Network, this is everything about the Safe Network, but then we also have MaidSafe.net, which is about the company where we work, which is building this, is one of the primary maintainers of the network as it stands. So this is more about the company. So that's just a little bit on the difference between those two things there. And okay, we have a question from Boogie at the moment, which is recommended to build, the documentation says recommended to build basic Electron app while referencing this documentation. A web IPA exposing the browser is nearly identical to the library with just one variation. So the web APIs and the Safe App Node APIs, so the APIs for Node.js, they differ in that the APIs available in the browser are overridden in a couple of points. One of which is just to make it simpler for authorizing things, but like you can't override where the libraries are, the libraries that do the network communication and stuff, which is an option available in Safe App Node.js, for example. So from a web browser, from the DOM, you can't do that. So these, a couple of these things that that just prevent these things, little bits of security or potential problems for a web app that basically they don't need to worry about. If we want, I can go into more detail on that later, but hopefully that's covered your question enough for now. Boogie, sweet. All right, Gab is having problems because it seems great. So
can you hear me?
Oh yeah, I can hear you. You're there, sweet.
Yeah.
You want to dive in for the next bit?
Yeah, which is
experiments.
Part of it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So let me share my screen again. Let's see if this time we're okay. So all we've seen so far is basically, the standard version of the browser, either for mock or for non-mock, for the live network. But since sometimes we are, working on several features or APIs that even the community and developers are aware of, and even helping us in defining, we also have what we are calling experimental APIs or experimental features. So in the browser, by looking at this menu, you can toggle and enable them. And when you enable them, that's when you're going to get to see this little icon here, which basically shows that the experimental APIs and features are enabled. As soon as you enable them, what happens is any web application open in a tab will have access to these additional experimental APIs. We're gonna talk about brief briefly about the main two areas, which are the store URLs and the web IDs APIs. So also you can see there is this other icon here, which is an experimental feature on the browser, which is enabled and showed only when you have the experimental features switch on. Josh is going to talk about this a bit more in a minute. Before that, I'm going to try to explain a bit what these store URLs are. There is already a tutorial, kind of a tutorial. It's just a website where explains a bit what store URLs are and some examples that you can see they're working on Alpha 2 network. So store URLs, as I was saying before at the beginning, every content on the network has a location, which is called a store name. And based on that store name, we can create URLs and encode the store name. So once you have that, you can access that content using the store URL, which means you don't have to publish such a location or such a website store at that location. You don't have to publish it under any human readable URL or DNS URL or public name URL, as we are also calling it. You can access the content directly using that. So there is a tool that we have which helps, I think it helps to understand this a bit more. This is just, this human readable URL is just a map to content stored in some location on the network. We have this tool which helps us find out what's that location that is being mapped to a URL. We are calling it Safe URL Analyzer. So if I type here that URL, I can ask this tiny application, it's a web app, available at this URL in Alpha 2 test network. That is going to just analyze the URL and, resolving the public name and service name. It will find out where it's being mapped to, which means this is a store URL of where the actual content of the website is. This means that if I open this, if I open a tab with this URL, what I'm going to see is just the same website, because that's actually where I'm actually accessing the same website content, but directly to where the files are, not going through the DNS resolution system. Well, this website automatically picks up where you could be accessing it from, but it's the same page. So that's what store URLs are, and they are still in experimental stage, and you only have available them when you enable the experimental switch here. For those who want to experiment a bit more with store URLs, we have some other tools here, like you can create immutable data, and this it will store it, and also it will show you the store URL here. And try to do it quickly. If it works. You have to put the type tag number for the immutable data you're gonna be creating. So I'm gonna do this. Let's see. It's gonna. Yeah. Okay. So it store a new mutable data on the network, and it's just telling you, what's the JSON that it's stored. And what it's doing is creating an entry which keys name and values Gabriel. That's what the JSON that I entered had. So it's gonna just create an entry for that. And if I go to here, which is the store URL of that mutable data that was just created, I should be able to see its content. This is also part of the browser in the experimental features of the browser, which is allow you to see the content of immutable data by accessing it with the store URL. So here it shows the list of entries. At the moment, there's only one entry: key, name, and value Gabriel, and the version is 0. When you update entries, you have to bump the version, so you can see which version that entry is at the moment. And which are the permissions? Also at the beginning, I said that data or content is always owned by the user. So this permission that we see here is basically the permission that was given to this application to create and store that data for me. But this piece of data is owned by me as a user with my account, the one that I use to log in to the authenticator. So that's an important thing to always consider. Data is not owned by the app, but by the account.
Just while you pause there, there was a question around why do we need XOR URLs when there are human readable URLs?
Nice, yes. So when you think of linked data, I'm gonna probably jump a bit. I'm gonna just to show an example of a web IDs without explaining what web ID is too much, because Josh's gonna do that now. But just to give you an example, find a web ID. I have this one, I think. So if you type a web ID URL, we're gonna Josh's gonna explain a bit of that, but basically, I'm going to pull the web ID profile document that is stored at that URL or mapped. You can see this is the content of an RDF document. And here we have part of that document has an image embedded. Now, this is the old and an early version of the format we were working on. But now that we have SOR URLs, we are able to store this chunk of data in any random location on the network, and I can create a link from this document to that piece of data without publishing that piece of data on a human readable URL. So basically, without the SOR URLs, the only way you can have links or URLs for data is if you publish that data onto with a public name or a human readable URL. But if you look at some newer web IDs, let me open. What do I have? I think. And let me do it properly. We're going to talk about this now with Josh. Let me open the. This is a web ID. This is another web app. Just want to get the link to one of the web IDs with a new format, so you can see how that changes now that we have the SOR URLs. So instead of having the image blob inside the document, we have a link to where that document is stored using a SOR URL. So you see here an image. It's not that blob of bytes anymore. We just put the link using a SOR URL. So this is a SOR URL which links to immutable data. If we take this, you can also see what's the image that's being linked from the web ID. So that's the image being linked. I'm not seeing where was that posted. Is it in the chat?
Yeah.
Okay, that was Boogie. Is that?
So basically, it removes clutter from the web ID document. Boogie follows up with.
Yeah. Maybe we can just jump into web IDs, Josh, and maybe explain all that, because to make a difference between what the URL and the web ID document itself is.
Sure, but it's worth saying, Boogie, that as well as making things slightly simpler, it means that every piece of data on the network has a specific URL, whereas otherwise it might be inaccessible without having a public name set up. So this means that all data inherently has its own URL that you can sort of access, which means that you can more easily sort of verify that a site is a specific version. Because what's at a public name could change. It could point to a different SOR URL, but you can know that if you have this one, then you are using the same version as the previous one. for example, even if the version at the public name system changes, which could be useful for security for web apps and things as well. So yeah, that said, Boogie is more impressed now. Cool. That said, let's dive into web IDs. So what is a web ID beyond this document that Gabriel has been showing us? It's essentially a document that describes a person or an organization, an entity, and it lets you describe yourself, that thing. And you can, not now, but will be able to eventually use your account to sign with a web ID so that you can prove that, so that you can know that this web ID always signs with these keys. And so you can know more about that web ID. You might not know if it's tied to a real person or a real organization, but you have some consistency in that sort of thing. As a user, you can use web IDs to say, this is me. And now instead of going to websites where you would normally give them your fucking email, make a new password, they'll ask you for your date of birth again, and they would, you know, take all this info and save it and store it. You just have this document. On Unsafe, there is no servers. So a website can take this document and use it to customize the interface. They can use it to know where to get a hold of you if the web ID specifies your inbox. So then people can say, right, so this guy that commented over here with this web ID, if I click on this, I can go and find his inbox and I can send him or her a message just from having this document that they use consistently. And that means as well, you can have many identities. So as you can see here, there's 3 different ones that Gabriel's got here. So he has 3 different identities he could be using on the internet with a website. So if we have a look at Patter, we can see how web IDs sort of play into websites on the Safe network. As the website loads, it's going to be very uninteresting because there is no web ID set to this tab. But with the browser in the experimental mode, we can grab the web IDs using a specific API that's exposed in the DOM as well. And we can choose a web ID and say, okay, this is me in this tab. This is the ID that I want to use in this tab. So go ahead and click. And then hopefully, yeah, the page registers that check. So in the DOM, there's an event fired, there's an object you can access to retrieve this information and work with it. So the web app retrieves this event and says, okay, sweet, I can now display information about this person's profile. It's equivalent to your Facebook homepage, but you didn't have to log in. You can just give it whatever. So Gabriel can actually change his web ID for this page and we'll get a different homepage. Slowly but surely. There you go.
Yeah.
So again, with this, you can use your web ID to send messages. You can identify yourself and authorize a web app to write as you, the user, but you can do that as a specific web ID. So Gabriel could here log in and write some messages and post it to this wall. And then he could log in as a different web ID and come back to this wall and comment as a different user, hopefully.
Yeah, we still need some loading icons here to improve it. But
yeah, so if anyone wants to dive in and improve the UI of Patter, for example, as a simple web app, it's not a bad place to start learning about Safe, because it is, websites on Safe are just JavaScript, it's just HTML, it's the same thing that everyone knows from everything else, it's just some different APIs that you need to do. But you don't have to do any server interaction, so, you know, you might have to learn a little bit, but hopefully you can learn a little bit and it'll take you a lot further than you would otherwise. So
yeah, this is just a web ID I found on the web from, maybe I can post something to his wall.
Yeah, let's say hi Dimitar, how are you doing?
I just know he's there. He's been sharing that recently, so I'm gonna put that message.
Hi guys.
Hello.
Hey.
Let's post that into the wall.
So yeah, now you can see that Gabriel's web ID has posted. So as that entity, as opposed to the account of Gabriel, we don't know that this web ID is tied to the account, but that identity has posted something on Dimitar's wall, which is cool. It basically allows you to have personas on the Safe network, as many as you want and be as anonymous as you want, but control it all from your one account. Yeah, there's still a lot we need to work on around the usability of this, you know, how this works with tabs and whatnot, but it's a nice start. And it's worth saying as well, the web IDs, they're not strictly web IDs on the Safe network because they're on the Safe network and not available on the ClearNet, as a web ID should be in terms of the W3C conventions. But they are compatible with it. So if you were to take and use the document on the ClearNet through Solid or something, you should be able to actually use the same web ID. So yeah, I think that's it for the run through. Oh, we're going to show Patter, not Patter. Is not Patter still existing, Gabriel? Gabriel? He's lost.
Sorry, I was mute. Sorry, I was mute. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
No, I was just saying that I don't exactly remember if it's up to date with the latest API, and I don't even remember what it. So you can just explain what that was.
All right. So the other cool thing with Patter or web IDs or Safe in general is just to re-emphasize that you are in control of your data all the time. So while we have Patter, which is this interface to write data and to save it and stuff, you're not trapped to using Patter. Someone else can make a different, better version of Patter with not a blue background, with loading indicators or whatever, and they can put it somewhere else, and it can still access the same information, and you can still have it all. So you're never trapped in the world of Facebook, because it's your data. You just need somewhere else to go and access it. Someone else can make a better UI. So that's also really cool. And yeah, with that, that's the end of a little planned run through. So fire in with any questions you've got.
I have one question. I was reconnecting at some point. Did we share some of the URLs for documentation, that kind of stuff already?
Yes. Yeah, I went through the documentation links.
Okay.
So yeah, anyone got any questions? Want to pipe up or just type in the chat? Is Dimitar in Mexico? That's where Sasha is. Anything else in the chat?
So is this currently supported encrypted data? Encrypted data accessible via source URL. So you mean, Boogie, if you have the source URL of a content which was encrypted, in that case, at the moment that wouldn't work. Well, you could do you could do it like with an application, but that's not supported by the browser at the moment. Like, as the encryption keys, either public or private encryption keys, are not encoded in the source URL at all. The source URL only contains the source name, content type, and encoded in it. It's able to realize what kind of data or content you're fetching to render it, but not encryption. That's kind of an ongoing still discussion, I would say.
We got a question from John asking, the interface around web IDs and patter is confusing. See the forum. Are we planning to change the workflow? Yeah, I would love to make heaps of changes. I would love for anyone who has better ideas to dive in into patter and make some changes. I think part of the plan, some plans that we have, is at least to make that easier to do, and getting involved in the code bases with increased documentation. Patter currently doesn't have any tests, so we need to do that and that sort of stuff to make it easier for people to contribute to it. But the more general question of web IDs and patter and the browser and that sort of stuff, yeah, the whole browser, the whole workflow, we need to user flow. We need to look at for these things and figure out how best to work with this stuff, and also figure out how, if we might change web IDs, because right now we're following the standard for web IDs from the W3C, although it's not strictly a web ID. So are there things we can do to change that might make it more usable and that sort of stuff? We totally want to, yeah, make it less confusing, make it more natural, make it clear which one you're using in this tab or whatever, or maybe there's some other ways of doing that that's not dependent upon the browser. Yeah, more better, basically. I would love to see all of that.
Is that John JPL or another John? Just
I think it might be John Fergus now. Can I build an app using the experimental APIs and add a decryption option? It's JPL. Hi again. So Big is asking, can I build an app using the experimental APIs and add a decryption option?
I think so. I think what you need is somehow out of band, I would say, be able to share the encryption or the decryption key, right? And then when you fetch, let's say, mutable data using the source URL, you're gonna get basically the private mutable data, and all the entries are gonna be encrypted. But if your app is somehow being able to get out of band, the decryption keys, then you just use those to decrypt them. If you ever try that and need help when doing, just ping us on the forum. We can try to help you with the code. I mean, I think it is possible. And the whole the thing is, if we encode the decryption keys in the URL itself, then that's not private anymore. I mean, well, as long as somebody else, which wasn't intended to receive the URL, gets it, then anybody can, decrypt the data. So it could work still for some cases if you encode the encryption key in the URL, then because it's gonna be hard for someone to guess it and just find it by chance. So only the one that you share the URL with would be, decrypted in accident, but kind of loses the main goal of it, I would say. But yeah, it's an ongoing discussion. We can also trigger or re-trigger. I don't remember if there is another already a discussion about that, about private data with source URLs. I mean, on the forum.
Cool. We got another question from John. Is cache working yet? If so, where, how is cache data stored? What is left to do? In the browser, there's caching per session, as long as you've got the app open. It's built on Chromium, so stuff is kept in memory, I think. Did we turn that off? I think that's happening within the browser per session. Cache on the network.
Sorry, yeah. I was going to ask, are we talking about the cache on the browser, or?
I was just going to swing by both of them.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. Cache on the network level, well, I'm going to swing by and say I don't know. Do you know on the network level if cache is implemented? I don't think it is. Is it?
There is a cache on the Safe client libs layer, so which means any application, including the browser, when it's using the Safe client lib, because if the browser uses the safe plain lips layer to access data, then it has this cache. I don't remember exactly all the rules about it, but it has some cache. So whenever you are fetching data, it would keep it in the cache. I think it's kept until it's running out of memory, and then just removing the older one, something like that. Some mechanism like this. But yes, we have that in safe plain lips. That's one cache.
For immutable data.
I think we have for every object.
Nikita's piped up in the chat saying it's only for immutable data. I believe him.
Okay. Cool. Thanks a lot, Nikita. Yeah. I do believe him too.
Cache locally in memory or cache somewhere in the network close to me? In memory, I think Nikita's about to say, but I'll let him answer that in the chat.
Yeah, the cache in safe plain lips is locally in memory, right? Wherever your application is running. On the network, unless, apart from the cache that nodes with, I'm not sure if they already have, I think so, for when you're retrieving data, and I think it's only immutable data as well. I don't think there is any other cache apart from that. I mean, when you are fetching a website or content, nodes that are, in the way to get you that piece of data. I think this being is opportunistic cache called. I don't remember the name of it. Maybe Nikita remember that name of that particular feature of the network. But I don't think there is any other cache apart from those two, and probably the browser. But Josh, do you know if there's any cache in those? Right.
Any more questions? Web app specific things you're wondering about, or browser things, or deeper network questions like caching, we can muddle through.
Cool. Okay. Well, if there's no more questions just now, we'll finish up. Massive thanks to Josh and Gabe for talking us through all that. Thanks everyone for joining. We've recorded this, so we'll get this up on YouTube next week. And any more questions, just where to put them into the forum. So thanks everyone.